It's another night, another death in Johannesburg, and another night lost on the scene for Inspector Francois Kraus. He's always the last policeman on the scene. His police job is not to pursue the living, but to collect the dead. The dead who have not died peacefully in their sleep.
Okay, so you showed the 2 children. They've been taken to hospital.
Inspector Kraus collects the victims of unnatural deaths in Johannesburg. His role is impersonal, to see to it that every item on the body at the time of death is given to the family. By law, he must also take the body to the place where all those who died unnatural deaths must go, a police mortuary. Only later can the body be buried.
Okay, let's just complete that 180.
A police mortuary is the first stop for South Africa's victims of crime and accidents. The beaten, the shot, the stabbed, and mangled. But unnatural deaths are only part of the body count. It's another Saturday morning and another funeral in Edendale, KwaZulu-Natal. The sounds of grief have become increasingly and worryingly common in Edendale, just outside Pietermaritzburg. Early on Saturday mornings, tents spring up in the township. Groups of smartly dressed people gather on the streets. This could be a birthday or some other celebration, but locals say they know otherwise. They know that it's a sign that yet another person has died. In Edendale, undertakers are doing a brisk trade. There are many reasons for the boom, and most funeral parlors confirm they have more business than ever before. This funeral home, one of many in the area, says there's been a marked increase in deaths among young people. In this province, undertakers say death certificates are more often than not emblazoned with a widely used euphemism: natural causes.
Ngokwama age group abantu abahamba kakhulu abantu abasukela ko 1975 kuyehla kuthi futhi abantu abasukela ko 29 years kuza ko 18 years ibona kuphela abahamba kakhulu.
In KwaZulu-Natal, this means one thing: AIDS.
We are running short of spaces in our graves because of a number of factors which are affecting that. One is proper burials, people who are buried free of charge by the TLC, which is their responsibility to bury them nevertheless. Then the other one is almost every weekend we are burying plus minus 30, almost every weekend.
This is Mountain Rise, Pietermaritzburg's biggest cemetery. It's barely 9 o'clock in the morning. Already the cemetery is a hub of activity. Funerals are taking place side by side. They're so close together that the singing from different services intermingles. Here, mourners would not be blamed for getting lost. There is a huge turnover of funerals, a constant jostling for space. One funeral is barely over when another begins next to it. The crowds and lines of tents give the appearance of a flea market, but death is the reason everyone is here. Undertakers say at the rate at which they are burying bodies, Mountain Rise will soon run out of space.
Engakusho njena roughly ngesonto engibabeka lana o 8-10 ngesonto la elokhuzene Mountain Rise kuphela. So I think kwezinye indawo ke nakhona ke bakhona ke abangcwabayo and nami ngiyangcwaba kwezinye kodwa njena la Mountain Rise u8 kuya ku10 every week.
Some people are even buying up graves in advance.
Since people are starting to buy more graves, then we're running more, the period is becoming shorter day by day.
For undertakers, this is good news. More deaths mean more business. For municipalities, the squeeze is on. But custom is all important, and it can pose a problem.
In the context of African traditional religion and belief system, community is understood in a much more holistic sense. It is understood as comprising two realms of existence. The realm of the living, us who live in the physical world, as well as the non-living, those who live in the spirit world, so to speak. Symbolically, there's a notion that one's place of burial should be close to your ancestral land, so to speak.
These two brothers were born on and have lived on their family's land all their lives. For them, like many others, it's unthinkable to break the ties of tradition. The dead are bound to the lives of the living, and so they must always be close to them.
Ukuthi nathi sisuke sikholele kuthina ukuthi zonke insuku kufanele kuthina ukuthi sazi kuthina ukuthi naba la bekhona.
Their parents, two brothers and a relative's child are all buried in the backyard.
Kusho ukuthi njengoba size singcwabela le emakhaya nje sisuke senzela kuthina ukuthi sisigadele ngoba kukhona nabantu abamathakathi abakwazi ukuthi bathathe inhlabathi bayothakatha ngayo. Ingakho ekuthina ukuthi ngcono kuphunyuke kuthina ngoba la ngcwatshela khona suke ngekho phoyisa suke ligadile.
Insisting on being buried next to family members is by no means a rural, outdated custom. Urban burial grounds like mountain rides also have to balance a shortage of space with the need to cater for people's cultural beliefs.
Kunye futhi abantu into inkolelo yabo ukuthi uma ubaba wabo angcwatshwa le mountain rise nomama noba umhlobo wakubo naye athi nama sengibekwa kodwa ngobekwa khona eduze kwabo emathuneni laba abangcwatshwa khona.
You find that 3 or 4 from one family member, they are coming to you over a period of 1.5 months or over a period of a month. You bury about 2 to 3 in one family.
Edendale in KwaZulu-Natal is at the epicenter of the AIDS pandemic. Death is big business here. Town planning researchers say the space needed for burials in the province over the next decade is the equivalent of some 3,000 soccer pitches. Grave diggers say they are working overtime. There has been a substantial increase in deaths in the last 6 years.
Impela sesimba kakhulu kuleminyaka manje. Ngoba kuleminyaka ngikhumbula ngifika mina la kwaungasebenzi umshini kama weekend. Bekusebenza abantu. Kusuke uqala kwalezi imvule zana ngo-1997 kwaqala ukuthi kufa abantu kakhulu kwacaca ukuthi mase kufuna kube wona umshini ozosebenza ukugqiba abantu kwamanje abantu abasakwazi ukuthi balekelelane futhi ke kwase kufika sona-ke lesifo umashapu uqe mhlambe ubona vele ngibositholela ikhambi ekugcineni sibakwazi baphila abantu ngoba phela sesiphelile isizwe ililanga mhlambe sothola ukujabula kona sekukubi impela sekumungu ngoba sekuphele indawo esingaba kuyona manje.
Space isn't the only problem. The location of cemeteries is critical and could be a town planning time bomb. The Council for Geoscience is researching the impact of cemetery sites on town planning and the environment. Of particular concern, they say, are cemeteries that fail to comply with health regulations. Judging from some of the sites surveyed so far, they say it's a disaster waiting to happen. Azalea Cemetery in Edendale simply does not comply.
This particular cemetery is encroaching into steeper slopes and encroaching towards the road here. And on the other side of the road, there are settlements being established. So what we have is the cemetery encroaching into the road, we've got settlements encroaching up the slope, and the two meeting together, very close proximity. And with a high runoff and erodibility and material getting washed from the cemetery down slope, these things it's highly problematic.
By law, cemetery planners have to evaluate the type of soil in the area and how close it is to a water source. Graves also have to be a certain depth. This cemetery, run by the local municipality, appears to have completely ignored these standards.
The minimum depth for grave excavations is 1.8 meters. Clearly, the bottom of this grave is nowhere near that depth. In fact, I'd say it's probably not even a meter. And very close to the surface is solid rock, and that's very difficult to excavate into. So there's no ways in an area like this that any of these graves around this area are at the required minimum depth.
With its ever-increasing mounds of soil, Azalea Cemetery is nearly full. Despite this, burials are still taking place unhindered. It is a potential health hazard.
Well, these are fresh graves. These have been people buried over the last week or so, and there's a lot of flies around here, and they're obviously attracted to something. And I suspect that they're attracted to the odours coming from decomposing bodies. The graves are built up with essentially just rubble. So there's a lot of cracks, a lot of holes through which those odours can permeate through. And that is what I suspect the flies are attracted to.
Many cemeteries have their own unique problems. A province like KwaZulu-Natal has high rainfall. Cemeteries built on unsuitable soil can potentially pollute the water supply.
You're looking for soil conditions that will promote decomposition. And in a heavily clay soil, often percolation rates, permeability rates are not high enough. Or you just get stagnation of the body. You don't get proper decomposition, and it's just like a stew.
Sintengi Cemetery in Pietermaritzburg is above a river used by locals. But researchers caution against creating panic that HIV could contaminate the groundwater.
When a person does die and all the cells die, the HIV virus will eventually die in the person. So burying a person with HIV is not going to be a danger to the general population. But what we do know is if contaminated water, for instance, is left lying on a table with the HIV virus in it, that can survive outside the body for a period of time. But certainly if you bury a body under the stipulated controlled ways, you will not get contamination of water by the virus.
This cemetery is just outside Stanger in KwaZulu-Natal. It's been closed since it ran out of space. But people are still burying bodies here, in a site that was never suitable for burials in the first place. Across the road are settlements, in an area with such high rainfall and a high water table. This cemetery also fails the suitability test. Geologists say in a few years' time, the rain will have exposed most of these graves. It may not even take that long. The locals are using borehole water, completely unaware of the problem across the road.
The burial of bodies obviously will retain germs. They are buried very deep, and that's why there are regulations which control the burial of human remains. I mean, if it weren't safe to bury bodies, they wouldn't be buried.
In South Africa, chances of dying a violent death are high. This is Roodepoort Government Mortuary in Johannesburg.
Right, our cause of death, JP, is fractured neck.
Government mortuaries take in all bodies that did not die of natural causes. The National Injury Mortality Surveillance System keeps account of all fatal injuries. It has repeatedly found gun violence to be the leading cause of non-natural deaths.
Here at the Roodepoort Mortuary, we can do up to about 2,000 unnatural deaths a year. Johannesburg, the figures are obviously higher, more like 4,000, and in Soweto we do about 3,000 unnatural deaths. And as I say, we do full postmortems on them. We submit our reports to the court. So the courts normally start about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. We then go from the post-mortem room to the various courts to testify.
In the big cities, homicides are predictably higher.
Johannesburg is a major metropolis, and it's a breadbasket, you could say, of Africa. The population now in Johannesburg, from the statistics, is close on the 3 million and could be actually over the 3 million, whereas back in 1996, we're close on the 2 million. So a 1 million increase in 5 years is quite considerable.
Adding to the spiraling statistics are the bodies with no names, those the government has to bury because no one else will. This is the pauper burial section of the Ennerdale Cemetery south of Johannesburg. This is where the nameless, unclaimed bodies that end up in government mortuaries are laid to a simple, dignified rest.
We've buried a little, it's like today, we've buried 21. Sometimes we even up to 50 paupers we bury a week. Just a month, I can say maybe we bury more than 100 paupers. These paupers are really uprising. I think it's because of this lot of immigrants that are here. Because if there were no immigrants, I think there wouldn't be paupers. Because if these people had their families here in South Africa, definitely their families would come for them.
Baba wethu othandekayo senkosi yethu Kristu silapha baba Nkosi namandla ukuzofihla Nkosi elungileyo abanye abantu Nkosi elungileyo abalahlekileyo Nkosi namandla befunwa emakhaya yihlobo zabo belahlekile bengaziwa bezosebenza eGoli kepha bahlangabezana Nkosi lamandla nokufa meswe ngcwele bopha yihlobo lapho zikhona nomndeni nabantwana ngephande lakho likamoya oyingcwele.
Pauper deaths and burials are an unavoidable problem for town planners. The municipalities, especially in big cities, need to plan ahead for space to accommodate them.
It's mainly a question of urbanization. The 1 million people coming into Johannesburg in the last 5 years is a vast amount. And taking those additional people, that means more people are going to be dying, yes.
Migration to the cities, homicides, unclaimed bodies, a grim reading list for town planners. They have to understand how the nation is dying, why it is dying, and what, if anything, has been done to ensure we have space to bury them. This is one of the main arteries into Soweto, the country's largest and most populous township. Adding to the bustle on Saturday mornings is the so-called funeral traffic. It's so heavy, it's been known to bring the main roads to a virtual standstill.
Cemeteries are very important as part of town planning. We have to make sure, apart from people having housing whilst they're living, that we have sufficient space for people when they're dead.
Their destination is Avalon Cemetery. It's the city's and country's biggest and most well-known burial ground. Political heavyweights like Joe Slovo and Helen Joseph are buried here. Avalon Cemetery sprawls across 172 hectares, but it too is filling up. Colorful tents and crowds are a common feature on Saturday mornings. Avalon has only enough burial space to last another 6 years. Then it will be full. But city officials say there is nothing to worry about.
There is no crisis here in Johannesburg. Of the 33 cemeteries that we have sufficient burial space to take us to the year 2009. However, we've been very fortunate in making sure that we've made provision for the future.
In Johannesburg, officials are exploring alternatives. This is the cemetery serving Alexandra east of the city. Johannesburg City Parks say they are having some success in convincing people to save grave space by burying the dead on top of each other.
This is an example of a double burial here, where the grave has been prepared ready for a funeral for tomorrow. At present, there is a coffin already in, and it has been down approximately 6 months. We only open the grave over a 6-month period to ensure that there's no problems. It's not unique. It has been used for many years in Johannesburg, but amongst the various cultures, it has not been practiced. But here, over a period of time, we've introduced it to the different people, and they're actually making more use of double burials.
It will be interesting to see whether, in the context of modern pressures, not sufficient space, for example, at burial sites, whether people would embrace creative ways to ensure that tradition does fit into changing circumstances.
Ideas from abroad are also being looked at. This is a mausoleum where the dead are buried above ground. It's popular in countries like Italy, where the water table is high. But it costs a lot more than a grave. Only the wealthy can afford it. But there is another, cheaper method. It's acceptable in some communities, but it's taboo in others. Cremation, say municipal authorities, could drastically save on grave space. But at this crematorium, like many others, the strains of funeral hymns are few and far between.
Is not one preferable choice. I mean, my choice is cremation for a number of reasons. And I think for me, I just want to feel when I've died, for instance, that I am gone, that people don't think of me still in a place as a decomposing body.
Burning a human body is still taboo in most communities, especially amongst blacks. This crematorium, directly behind Avalon, is not nearly as busy as the cemetery.
Cremation, we've got a problem with this culture. So in our tradition, it is not easy to cremate someone because of the ancestors' beliefs of people that once someone is burned, so where are you going to take your kids, your grandchild, and show them that here's your grandfather, here's your great-grandfather, etc.
In African tradition, that the very idea of cremation does not sit in very well because it seems that it tempers with the sacredness of the human body.
Cremation may have a negative image, but, says Johannesburg City Parks, it should be promoted as the preferred alternative to burial.
What scares them mostly is some people would think that you are dead, but not really, you know. And so they feel that when you go into the machine, being dead, you are going to feel all the pain and of the flames and so on. And that is simply not true. It is very neat, it is very clean, everything is done very tidily, and I would recommend it for anybody, even my own family.
What we're trying to do here is to promote cremation, which will save burial space, and it's actually a lot more cost-effective. The community still has the remains, the family still has their ash remains. They can place it into a wall of remembrance, a garden of remembrance, or they can take the ashes home. It's totally up to the family member themselves.
Not that cremation is an uncomplicated, easy means of disposing of human remains.
I see no injuries on her.
A doctor must complete detailed paperwork before a body can be cremated.
So we certainly do have the lady that you're telling me that it is. One of the important things is to assess whether the person has died of natural or unnatural causes. And if they've died of unnatural causes, there has to have been a post-mortem at the government mortuary. And at that time, all the evidence is then taken from the body, and we would then be happy to cremate the body.
Customs play a very great role with this. But I think education also. Once people have been educated on the roles and understand the health regulations and reasons, we still have to do a lot more education outputs there to get the community to make use of the cemeteries more effectively and efficiently.
In South Africa, there are as many deaths as births. New burial sites are being found. But the challenge is getting people to relook at the way they've always done things.
It would appear that a critical rethinking of the tradition would suggest that, as we have said earlier on, that traditions are not really closed systems as they are made to be.